The match is getting more and more interesting as Nihal Sarin struck back in the fifth game. It's now 3-2 in the favor of Praggnanandhaa. He opens with e4 and Nihal wants to go for the blood again. He plays the Sicilian. Is he going for the Najdorf? You can see Pragg there just thinking a bit because there's an option to give a check in this position, which is also a very fine move. And of course the main line is d4 with open Sicilian. He goes knight c3, knight to f6 played by Nihal, and you can literally sense the confidence in Nihal's body language after he won the last game. d4 played by Pragg, pawn takes, we have the open Sicilian on the board, knight takes d4, and now a6, the Najdorf. The very popular Najdorf has been played, and let's see how Pragg counters it. He goes for the fianchetto system with g3. The knight drops back to e2, and white will now play his bishop to g2 and castle. So bishop e7, bishop g2, black castles, white castles. Both sides have had a very solid formation, but the play will revolve around the d5 square because that has been weakened. It's a weak square, and Pragg instantly takes control of it. He plays his knight there. Now Nihal can play bishop b7, but then after take, the d5 square remains weak. So what he does, he sort of bolsters the knight there. Pragg bolsters his own knight, and the bishop comes in, and now he attacks the queenside pawn with a4. So Pragg playing pretty quickly after that, quite a long think on move number 4. He has gained time and is ahead on the clock. Bishop takes the knight, and now knight takes, and Pragg takes with the pawn. He realizes that he has given up the weakness on d5, but on the other hand, he now has a very nice pawn and a majority on the queen side that he would like to push. Also, not to forget, white has the bishop pair. Nihal plays his queen to c7. He says that I have my own trumps, the semi-open c file, the rook swinging over. So there's a lot to play for. Also, the bishop is not particularly great on g2. It can pop out on h3. So pawn takes, the rooks are traded, and now the queen comes into d3, attacking the pawn on b5. Nihal has to play this carefully because it could happen that very soon he will get into the Pragg bind, where Pragg loves to grind these equalish positions. One thing is that you can push your pawn here to b4, but then it does become a bit weak. So Nihal plays queen to b7. He defends the pawn, and Pragg now plays his bishop here. His idea is to plonk the bishop on b4, where it would put pressure on the d6 pawn. And look at Pragg's time now. He has 2 minutes 30 seconds. Nihal has 1 minute 30 seconds. So clearly, from the time utilization, you can sense who is more comfortable in a game. Is it Pragg or is it Nihal? Right now, it's clearly Praggnanandhaa who's feeling the ease, feeling the flow. Knight comes to c5, hitting the queen, and now the queen has to move. Where should it move? Because the knight controls this square. Queen e3 looks like a good square. You can also drop back your queen to e2. There's also queen to c3. Plenty of options there. Pragg also slowing down now, trying to figure out what is the best way for him to continue. If Pragg, imagine, can play b4, kick the knight out, then play c4, exchange these pawns, he will have a passer. He goes queen e2. Can Nihal already start entering on the 7th rank? He goes b4, but this is a risky move because he's given up the c4 square, and the white queen can now settle in here. However, imagine that if you can play b3 and queen c4, if you get both these moves, then that would be very, very powerful. Pragg plays queen c4, but Nihal has his next move ready, the concrete move of playing b3. So Nihal on his own going and exchanging pawns, which means that Pragg would get a passed pawn. Now look at this. This is a passed pawn. However, he believes in his position. Nihal believes that his knight, which will come to d4, will be an absolute monster. So first the rook is traded. Rook is attacking the queen. The queen has to move, but where exactly? Do you go to d3? Do you go to g4? Oh, g4 is an interesting move. You can keep pressure here. Very strategic game. Quite different from all the tactical battles that these players have been having and the fast-paced games. This is a slightly more positional game. g6 played by Nihal. And maybe he wants to just move his bishop this way or from the other side, put it on g7 and start pushing his kingside pawns. That is the idea here. h4 played by Pragg. And h5 by Nihal Sarin. Now the queen has to move and he goes back queen e2. Somehow it does feel that black's position is more harmonious, but white's position has more potential if black goes wrong, especially with the bishop pair and the outside passed pawn. He goes king h2, but now Nihal slowly and steadily making slight improvements in his position. First getting the bishop there, then the king moves up. Queen comes up to e3, and now the knight settles down in the center of the board. Queen comes to d3. How does Nihal continue the pressure? You can again look at the times and you will feel the flow going in another direction. This time the flow is going in Nihal's way. f4 played. What a risky move, because it kind of opens up the second rank here. Queen b6, Nihal bolsters his knight in the center so that if pawn takes pawn, he can take it with the bishop. Goes bishop e4. Some pressure here. Maybe you want to push the pawn to f5, and this king can get a bit lonely here. He takes the pawn. Very interesting. Nihal Sarin, look at the calmness on his face. Rook takes f4, and now the bishop comes to the center of the board, attacking the rook. Look at Pragg's time. Oh, he sacrifices with just 13 seconds. What is this sacrifice? Firstly, if you take here, then he would like to take this piece as it opens up. And secondly, if you take the rook, then I take the knight with the check and your queen falls. So very interesting sacrifice there by Pragnananda. Bishop takes, and he's now a pawn up because the queen is hanging here. And Nihal Sarin does look a bit tensed now. Suddenly, he, from a good position, he's landed into this tactical fight. Bishop takes, queen takes, and they're going into a rook endgame where Pragg is a pawn up. Nihal moves to the 7th rank. 15 seconds, rook comes back and he brings his king in. I think Nihal has figured out that he has enough activity to keep balance in the position. Rook a4. And although Pragnananda is a pawn up, it's not so easy to make progress, especially because this pawn is weak, so is this pawn. Rook moves up. Nihal attacks the pawn on b2. The pawn is also moved ahead. Now this rook is doing double duty. It has to defend d5 as well as b3. So not so easy for Pragg to make progress, but he does what is very logical. He brings his king to the other side where it can defend this pawn. So king moves forward, king c2, rook check here, and now the king moves away, rook goes back, king here, check, rook c3, and the rook comes here, and they agree to a draw. Whoa, that was an intense game. With this, the score now stands 3.5, 2.5 in Pragg's favor.